Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us here today, this Tuesday, January 24th, for our Cloud Security webinar. It's number 3 of our cloud-based series. I hope you get something out of it, some information. Basically, what I hope to provide to you is just some information, so just to provoke some thought process in and around cloud security. Cloud security is quite analogous, sort of the way cloud mechanisms are today. As we go and we talk about cloud enterprise for the enterprise and cloud computing in general, it can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. I know from the list that we have here, there are many industry professionals here that are probably interested in just listening and wondering what we have to say as it relates to cloud computing. And cloud computing is something that has come to the forefront in the last couple of years. It's been around for quite a long time. Grid computing, obviously, morphing itself, probably gets a bad rap for a lot of different reasons. Also gets a lot of good press for a lot of different reasons. But I would just like to stick to to some of the thoughts that I've heard from the industry pundits, some of the things that I've garnered over my years in the industry, and not only that, also what I'm seeing today as far as what's happening in the trends and in person. So as we go through the three layers of cloud computing, I just want to touch on these so that we can get an idea of what I'm going to be talking to and how I'm talking to it from a security aspect. Because obviously procuring hardware, software, the speeds and feeds for cloud computing is dependent on the many different facets of cloud computing and the many different requirements for the enterprise. Now, we say for the enterprise, and that's quite new now these days because they seem to be focusing solely on the enterprise, anything larger than 10,000 and above. But cloud computing is also available for many other organizations, not just enterprise-grade type of computing platforms. You have small SMB, you have mid-tier organizations, higher education, government is investing heavily in cloud computing, and also the enterprise as well. Private industry is looking at cloud computing to help shore up some of their costs and expenditures. But along with that, there are a lot of different caveats, a lot of pitfalls that if not watched or monitored correctly, you could find yourself in a very big money pit, one that can actually either sink a business or cause a great deal of stress on the organization itself. So let us take a look at what we have here as far as the 3 layers of cloud computing. We have software as a service, obviously finished applications that you can rent and customize. Salesforce.com comes to mind, anything based iTunes, Apple, organizations such as those that provide an application layer based software that you can actually rent out as a service. You pay a different organization to maintain your records, your databases, and be able to access it pretty much anywhere from the web. Those are the constructs of SaaS. Then you get yourself into, sorry, having problems with my mouse, platform as a service. Basically, developer-based platforms. In other words, having the infrastructure built out so that your software and application builders, if you're building some sort of application that's going to change the world, usually these require, in this day and age, require a platform to serve on. Now, the reason for that is because you have a lot of different collaboration that is taking place across the world. You may not necessarily have all of your developers all in one area, and you might also have hardware people. So you have to have the hardware people talk to the platform people, and the developers talk to the OS and middleware and what have you. And all of those different organizations need to talk to each other at one time or another, and that can introduce in itself another security hole. So then we get ourselves to infrastructure as a service, deploying this stuff yourself internally, garnering all of the platform and the hardware and all the developers and maintaining that in-house. Now, while that can be fairly ambitious, typically what I've seen today, many organizations are going in a SaaS route or a PAAS route, because it is costly to do this yourself. Now, if you're an organization fortunate enough to invest in all of the hardware and all of the different caveats that come with deploying cloud computing, more power to you. But that, again, introduces another set of security concerns that might not necessarily be addressed right off the bat. So as we look at the early adopters of cloud computing and the startups that are using it at scale, you also, like I said before, you also have small businesses. You also have enterprises now entering in the fray and getting their feet wet in cloud computing, and then you have firms with with computes and tests, basically developers, software developers, companies that develop video games and stuff. Organizations that require plenty of collaboration. At the end of the day, that's really what you're trying to do, is being able to access your data anytime, anywhere, in real time, and have it on demand as much as possible. These are all very, very top of mind thought processes when you're developing such a system as this. But the other thing that kind of falls off the table is the security aspect, because inherently we believe that when the organization that we're attached to, so let's say headquarters, is secure, that's going to propagate its way up the food chain down to up into the cloud. When you have that thought process, a lot of different things can happen as far as the gaps that are created, the risks that are not looked at, and certainly the security holes that can be breached. So as I said, security afterthoughts or current initiatives thought to be adequate and scalable. These are things that need to be addressed. These are things that to be thought of typically when you develop your own in-house system, not a cloud. But now when you extend it to the cloud, you have to make sure that you extend that security and make sure that you're able to provide a secure means of delivery. So these are just some of the other ways of accessing the cloud and why you would be accessing the cloud. And all of these also introduce another layer of security risk. And we'll be talking about that in a few seconds. I just wanted to get this out there as far as how many different ways you can get access and use the cloud, and the different reasons you'd be using the cloud. Certainly, this is not the end-all, be-all list, but it's a good starting point. But also understanding that every one of these aspects, just as if you were developing your own in-house platform or your own in-house data center, you're going to need to address these security concerns. So another thing that we have to look at are the multiple security mechanisms that are required to manage your cloud-based initiatives. Too much to manage. How do you maintain your policy in a cohesive state when multiple parties are involved? Those are really good questions that you need to be looking at. Now, because cloud computing has a myriad of different options, you have to look at what your goals should be when deploying a cloud computing initiative. So additional capacity. Do you need this much capacity? Now, I ask that when you do look at, you start exploring going down the road for cloud-based computing initiatives, that you understand what you need versus what your wants are. You need to take that and separate them, just as much in the way you would do with life, and how much do you really need, and how much is just excess. Because when you have excess, you introduce a lot of other unnecessary items that you may not necessarily be ready to cover. Improve the user experience. At the end of the day, for the guy at the other end of the cloud, that's what's important. If it's not usable, certainly the customer is going to be angry, as your investment's going to go right out the window. Greater elasticity. How fast can you grow it? How fast can you maintain it? These are the things. When you build these things out, not only do you have to focus on what it takes to build it, now you're also going to have to focus on what it takes to maintain it. And then you're introducing security into the fold. Now, what does it take to secure that? So you look at the hardware, and you look at your platforms, and you look at all your vendors that are providing these cloud-based services. Are they really in line with what you're trying to accomplish as an organization? Those are questions you need to be asking of your organization itself. Obviously, flexible bursting, how fast do we need to be able to access the additional capacity? Those are in-house questions that also can introduce a lot of different issues. Now, we look at cloud applications, and we look at the platform infrastructure for clouds and platforms for clouds and applications for clouds. You look at the different organizations that offer these services. There are a lot. Now, there are a lot more now today than I'm showing here on this grid here. But each one of them has their own set of security policies and security rules. How do you marry that to your organization when you actually go out and you rent these services? Or how do you marry the organization to your internal user base? And how does that get propagated down to the user, down to the developers, to the engineers? How do you make sure that those are enforced? It all starts with a very cohesive policy. When you go and you develop the initiative to start building these cloud-based services, and you're looking at different organizations to either help you, you have to take a good hard look at your policy. One, you have to make sure that it's driven from management from higher management down, so that you have buy-in. Then you have to go to the education, where you're educating your end user to make sure that they are aware of the policy that's out there. Now, many organizations, when you walk in the door, they give you this piece of paper, the acceptable usage policy, or the AUP, and they make you sign this thing. How many people actually do read that piece of paper? How many people actually do understand what is at the end of the at the end of this rainbow? Not many. I mean, I for one have gotten many acceptable usage policies and just oh, okay, you figure it's standard fare, so you sign it. But what is in it really is a bunch of rules and ideals that have been set forth to create this policy that, one, may have been written for a era, couple generations removed technology-wise. Two, the end user may not necessarily understand the information that's contained herein because it's written in such technical jargon. And three, upper management doesn't enforce it. So you have basically paper that's just been signed with ink on it that doesn't really mean anything. If it's not enforceable and the organization is unable to apply pressure to its user base to make sure that that's enforced, then quite frankly, your security policies are going to fall apart. Because what's going to end up happening is you're going to have a user come to the Joe administrator and say, hey, Mr. Administrator, I cannot access this service because I have all these security restrictions. Now, what can you do for me? I really need to get this done. So we start popping holes here. We start popping holes there. Now, and that's not even in the cloud. So now let's take that a step further and we move that onto the cloud. So now we're marrying our security initiatives or our base security policy, and we're porting it over to the cloud, and we're telling the organization, yeah, Mr. Salesforce.com or WebEx or Google, I want you guys to to understand I have these sets of users that require access, but they can't be overly secure. We need to kind of marry what we have in-house. So what can you do for us? So one of two things is going to happen. Either the vendor is going to say, I can't do this for you, or the vendor is going to say, okay, I want your money, so we're going to let you in, and we're going to kind of marry that to you. But at the end of the day, you are going to be responsible for if anything happens to the information contained here in the cloud, because your security policies are lax. Those are things that you really, as an enterprise, as an organization, as a business unit, have to be able to answer readily and be able to face the man when things go south. And you have to be able to live with the trade-offs too. So security in the cloud. So now we're saying, all right, so now we're going to put security in the cloud, and we want to make sure that we're marrying it to the organization. Well, now let's go conversely to the other side. We have very strict. We have proxy servers. We have firewalls, we have ALGs, we have all of these different security mechanisms that we put in place, IDP, for our internal network. We want to make sure that that gets ported over to the cloud-based network. But now when you do that, you're kind of defeating the purpose of the cloud. Always available, always on time, very fast, very accessible, easy for the user and the consumer to use. Now we have to make sure that we haven't gone in the totally 180 and all the way to the other side, and completely now just locked everybody out of the user base and created a very poor user base experience because the customer has to sign in 4 or 5 times just to get into the services they're looking for. Oh, and by the way, we're going to time you out because now you've been online for 3 hours, but we only have a 3.5 hour window, so at 3:30 you're going to get cut off. Those are things that also need to be looked at and understood. What are the requirements for usage? When is it available? To who is it available? If it's mirroring what you have internally into your network, now you're doing a disservice to your cloud. So what controls do we lose when using cloud-based services? You have to look at that. One, physical and logical network barriers are broken. All of those are gone. So now anywhere, anytime. Endpoint restrictions and management. You don't know what the vendor might have. You have to make sure that you look and you understand what their policies may be. Non-authenticated or non-password authentication. Maybe it's just a token. Maybe it's just a cookie. Maybe it's something that, oh, they log into our single server sign-on on our network and it gets ported right through because you have a proxy that allows you access. Fine-grained credential and quality controls, password reset process. Again, user base experience. Those are things that the customer looks at. They don't care that it takes forever to create a ticket with the organization that's providing you the service, or they don't care that it's a very difficult process that you have to reset a couple things. And real-time anomaly detection. Again, how are you looking at that cloud? We're talking about trying to apply physical barriers to a virtual construct. When you attempt to do that, the math doesn't add up. You're simply looking at it from two different sides of the glass. One, can I apply this physical aspect to my virtual aspect? In short, the answer is no. You have to make some modifications and you have to make a couple of changes. But can it be done ultimately? Yes, it can be done. There are ways to do it, but we'll talk about that in a few minutes. And again, most IT departments, I put this in there because, again, every time somebody comes to an IT department and says, hey, this isn't working, the network's not working, or this is broken, usually everybody thinks that it's something that can be easily fixed. Why? Because it's been created, or the perception is networks are always available, networks are always on. It's just like picking up the phone. When you pick up the phone, you expect to hear dial tone. When you log into your network, you expect to be able to get access to what you think or you should have access to. So again, we talk about that security aspect in the cloud. It does defeat some of the benefits. If you're asking your question, does it defeat? It does. It allows you to use alternative. It forces you to think in a different paradigm, I guess, for lack of a better term. You use alternative credential schemas or tokens or certificates, whereas maybe you didn't before. Completely control password policies on your end, but maybe you might not have that on that end. Implement internal password resets. Those are things that you're either losing control or you're gaining control. It depends on how you're building. If you're building it internally, certainly you have the control. If you're outsourcing it, you really don't have that. You're subjugated to the rules and conditions, the terms and conditions set forth by the vendor. The ability to perform anomaly detection on login attempts. That is something that you can do in-house. However, is it something that is readily available via an outsourced partner? Place the portal behind a VPN, access control, endpoint management. Those are things you should be looking at. What we recommend are, one, talk about policies. Strong policies on quality and rotation. All of the schemas and the tokens. Can't have a password that lingers for 3 years at any one base time. That's gonna, somebody who has, the policy, their pet dog or, their children. Over time, they tend to leave those out there, or they've handed it out. Password rotation is key. Employee education. Again, can't stress that enough. Acceptable usage policy, getting somebody to sign, yes, you've covered yourself legally, but have you really covered yourself? The short answer is no. You can't. You can't expect somebody who's never really delved into an environment or doesn't understand the terminology in there to be able to understand everything that goes along with it from a security aspect or usage aspect, more or less. Never reuse credentials. These are things that, again, they live on a day-to-day basis in just about every organization when your password gets reset. Are you capable of using the same password? You might as well not change passwords. you might as well just keep the same password, just like this one, like the first recommendation: strong policies on quality and rotation. Why do it if you're gonna continue to reuse the credentials? You have to teach anti-phishing techniques. In other words, try to keep people, in their email and their information safe by not clicking on the button. Use of offsite SSO, single sign-on, if available. If you have the option of not having it in-house and having a data center or keeping it in a separate area, certainly one that would be free from being directly connected to the environment, that in itself would help. Consider additional restrictions using VPN. VPN is very strong these days with SSL VPN and doing layer 3, and also doing host checking, doing some sort of 802.1x. You can certainly help mitigate on the base platform. When I say base platform, I'm talking about either headquarters or your brick and mortar when you're sitting there. Those are areas in which you can further lock down the environment without creating additional work for everybody else with single sign-on and using additional restrictions with the VPN. If you're doing 802.1x, you can actually push your information down and to the port, so they're able to access the information that they're supposed to and be put in the proper VLAN. That way, less overhead for the engineer to go out and have to map those directly onto each switch. And then map to what protections you had pre-cloud. So again, you're looking at your policies. You have to review them. Your policies may have been written 20 years ago. 20 years ago, we were using modems. 20 years ago, we didn't have the speeds of which we have now. Viruses weren't as virulent back then. There wasn't malware. There were some Trojans, hanging out there, back in the day, but certainly not to the extent or level that we have today. Failure to look at your security policy and a failure to understand what is required from a day-to-day security management will likely run you into problems. One, not preparing properly will get you into a static and manual configuration management of your network. Your security infrastructure will probably not scale with demand. Again, you're talking about creating service on demand, speed on demand. You're talking about applications on demand. So if you're virtualizing your environment and you're starting to build all these virtual shares for the purpose of building out your cloud infrastructure, or if you're using a software as a service, that is a lot to manage on top of the day-to-day infrastructure that you might have in-house. And then if you have to statically and continuously make moves, adds, and changes, that is going in and of itself create a lot of different holes, because one, unless you have an army of individuals ready to go on the fly to start making these changes, you're not going to be able to keep up with the demand. Two, the documentation. Who's maintaining that documentation? Just like in your static environment, who's going to maintain this ever-changing, elastic environment the cloud is being known for? It's dynamic, it's fast. One day you can have your servers provisioned in Hong Kong. The next day you can have it provisioned in Singapore. And any security mechanism that you may have otherwise deployed in Hong Kong is now in Hong Kong, and your servers are in Singapore. Have you migrated that security policy or template over to Singapore? My guess would probably be no, because the first focus is to get the services up and running, and then we'll try to figure out the rest later. It's usually the problem with most in-house organizations is we face that problem not because we're lazy or we can't get it, we don't know how to do it. It's just that the on-demand requirement of always being on in a competitive environment that is today's business world makes us focus on getting the services up and running as quickly and as accurately as possible, thus leaving a lot of loose ends and not always saying we'll get to it later. We'll get this up and then we'll get to it later. Doing that again creates more manual configuration in the back end, static configurations. Doing that, you're just preparing yourself to sink yourself. Obviously, there are many tools on the market available now and emerging to meet this demand. You have Cohesive FT, VPN Cube, Cloud Switch, the next version of Cassette. Those are tools in which you can help, such as Orchestrator, being able to manage multiple platforms, multiple sessions, multiple this and that. However, likening it to the day when we were all using network monitoring tools. You know, if you buy Fluke, if you buy Netformix, you buy all these different organizations, tools, Tivoli, what have you. Who's going to manage that? Do you have an individual that's capable of looking at that? And then furthermore, understanding what they're seeing on the screen. Again, you may have somebody who's able to look and do data dumps and pull information and say, hey, this link is slow. Our cloud, you know, our frame relay or our MPLS circuits are very, very slow. Our QoS is not prepared properly. But also now you got to look at it from an anomaly base. Who's looking at that security? Do you have a security-based professional in-house that is capable of looking at this information, or are you expecting the same person to put in, you know, the servers and the switches to continue to do that work at scale? Again, you're talking about things that do not scale on a physical level, and then trying to apply this to something that happens at on a virtualized level at a very, very great deal of speed. Static manual processes to provision and manage VMs will probably not scale demand. This is what I was just talking about. So if you have all these, you know, these VM sessions and all of these different servers that you're building in and around the world or in and around the city or in your own data center, how do you manage that? How do you know it's secure? How do you trust that the information that's being provided in there is not being compromised because someone got into the server, logged in, and there wasn't a security checkpoint? Someone logs in, and now all of a sudden you have this virus that's bouncing in and around. Physical firewalls are looking at the outside of the I/O of that server, looking down the chain, looking down the chain of connections. So now we're talking about information that's bouncing in between, whereas IDP or the firewall is just standing outside, can't see it. The only thing is going to see the information come out. By that time, you know, it may be too late. And yeah, you can rebuild your servers on the fly. You can re-provision everything so fast that you know it makes your eyes peel backwards. However, think of all the time, all the effort, all of the lost cycles that just took place in trying to track down this problem. Those are the things that can actually sink a VMware deployment. You have to be able to look at the kernel where the hypervisor lives, or any other virtualized component, whether it be Citrix or Hyper-V, whatever it may be, whatever the virtualized mechanism may be, you have to be able to look at the kernel, be able to look at what's happening inside so as to be able to identify, one, my traffic is either flowing or not flowing correctly. There are anomalies. Perhaps there's a virus. Maybe there isn't, or maybe there is. You have to be able to look at that. And there are tools out there, certainly by many of the other organizations out there. But you have to be able to understand how you're deploying this and just where you're deploying it and where you need to put these security mechanisms. You also find yourself wanting to achieve versioned VMs to ensure VMs have specific attributes, otherwise to maintain governance. Now, if there's ever been a word that that creates fear in many security organizations, is governance. Because governance requires you to have a certain level of compliance. And the compliance in itself pretty much can create complexity. And if there's anything that organizations are afraid of complexity. Networks are complex already today. Now you're talking about adding another layer of security, another layer of compliance. Now you're trying to maintain governance, and what does that do? It adds complexity. How do you manage that complexity? Again, you have to go back to your policies. You have to make sure that you marry that policy to what you're trying to achieve as an organization. It's not simply saying this one size fits all is going to get it done. It doesn't scale. You can't scale. And I talk about scale because we're talking about clouds that at any one given time can grow from being just several nodes to thousands and hundreds of thousands of nodes out there. So when you have that much scale out there and we're growing exponentially and where business is good, and you're like, okay, we need to deploy more servers here, we need to be in Spain, we need to be in Germany, and who's watching the gate? And with the amount of different versions of VMs and all of the different boxes that are being pushed, and all the different services that are coming in and out. You need to be able to govern all those individuals by putting the appropriate mechanisms where they need to reside. But more specifically, because virtualization is pretty much the de facto deployment for cloud-based services, you have to be able to look at be able to look at the kernel inside of that VMware session to understand what the traffic is. Because just simply putting a firewall, simply putting ALGs out there is not going to get it done. And I can pretty much tell you, you're not going to have enough individuals out there if you grow something to that scale to deploy that many firewalls, that many IDPs, that many types of situations. Security for the cloud needs to be automated. Bottom line, that's what we're heading to. It's not 100% automation right now. It's getting there, but I can tell you, at one point or another, if we don't start completely automating this process, many holes will probably be created. You need to understand a way to maintain the self-service factor. Again, you're outsourcing some of these processes out there. You know, get it, Salesforce.com, Google, what have you. But again, you have to maintain some level of or some semblance of control yourself, some local administration. So those are things you have to negotiate up front with the organizations that are providing these services to you. Specifically to the security side, what are your token? What is your token? How can we manage the certs? What is your public key infrastructure like? How is it that we can manage cohesively and yet together without breaking the security model? It can be done, but those are issues that need to be addressed up front, not after it's been deployed and you already have thousands of customers online. Because what's going to happen there is you're going to end up with a very, very severe customer service issue, because now you're going to have to deploy a lot of different mechanisms out there to get the security to work, whereas the customer wasn't already aware. So what you're going to get is you're going to get kickback. I don't want to do this. Why do we have to do this? Now you're going to slow us down. You can't access this quickly enough. Those are items that really seem to steam up forward to the CFO, CEO of the organizations, and then they rain down and say, why wasn't this thought about? Why wasn't this taken care of initially? So a very good deployment plan needs to be put in place when you're developing your clouds. One, you look in your infrastructure. Do you have the capability and the bandwidth to handle what's coming down the pipe? Two, do you have the application or the need? What is your requirement? Why is it that you're trying to look at the cloud, and why is it that you're trying to deploy all of these cloud-based initiatives? And three, is my user base ready to accept the cloud? Do we have the device and the platforms to use the cloud? And then four, the security aspect. Do we have the mechanisms in-house, and do we have the policies in place to maintain that security and apply it to the cloud? Again, there are tools emerging that can address some of these needs, and how do you recognize these needs? Early adopters paved the way. We don't need to look very far. There are many different organizations in which you can actually pick their brain and say, we understand that you use the cloud. These are the best ways. Normally, in my line of business, we get a lot of jobs doing by referral, and usually it's a trickle-down effect. One organization engages us, they use our services. Next thing you know, in a CEO conference or CFO conference or CIO conference, what have you, they come together and they say, hey, we have this initiative. What do you do? And you network. Next thing you know, we get a phone call saying, hey, we heard you did this job. Can you talk to us about how you can help us with that job? The same thing rings true when you're going out and you're trying to get services or vendors to come and see you. Who do you recommend? Typically, you go out and you say, hey, I know so-and-so who works at this organization. Let me call him. Let me find out what services and what did he do for a similar deployment. And those are very invaluable tools. Apart from the tools that you use to build these things, it's important to understand that there are those that went before you and did go through all of this. They are going through all of this. They have taken their lumps, and they're probably willing to share because they want more individuals to adopt these services. And why? Because we are a community-based people. People are people, and from that aspect, we are communications-based. We want to know, we want affirmation that what we deployed is not only bleeding edge, so to speak, but also leading edge, and it excites us to tell other organizations, hey, we deployed this. This is the coolest thing. But here are some of the problems we ran into. If we could do it differently, we probably would have. But hey, let me share some information to you. Now, understand they probably won't share their secret sauce, but again, another otherwise valuable tool to be able to see how other organizations have done it. Again, more tools: Cohesive FT, Elasticserver, RPath, VMware, Juniper, many others that provide these types of services out there to help you navigate your way through this quagmire that is the cloud. The cloud is so analogous and so vague that it means everything to anybody. It's one of those things, either you're going to use it or you're going to say, bah, I don't need to use it. But when you do use it, you have to understand all of the caveats, all of the pitfalls, and understand the trade-offs of what the impact may be to your organization. So these tools, for the most part, have widely divergent solutions to the problems, and choosing one has many trade-offs. Again, you're talking about pulling in different tools. We kind of talked about Tivoli, OpenView, Fluke, using all these tools. So again, depending on how you use them and who you use, and if you're using outsourced or insourced, you might have loss of control. Moves, adds, and changes are slowed down. Processes hindered by lack of direction. Now, here's one where I have actually seen where lack of direction can actually cause the project to implode versus provide any real benefit to the organization. Lack of direction is, simply put, scope creep. You have this pie in the sky thought. I want to deploy this solution. So you go out, you get yourself a vendor, and the vendor goes out and he does his little spiel for you, and then he provides all the information. You guys sign on the dotted line, and you're ready to roll. Now you're 90% through the way. All of a sudden, you recognize that there's a need that was missed, that may not necessarily been uncovered, or maybe it's a new policy that one of your existing vendors is requiring to change on you. Or maybe they're changing their platform. Now you have to change stuff. But now nobody knows how to get to the end game, because now this is going to start creating a series of changes, series of developmental changes within the deployment. So now apply that to the cloud. So now you're starting to say, okay, so now we need to add this. Now we need to add to this other location. Now we have to make sure we have enough horsepower. Do we have enough cooling? Do we have enough power? Do we have enough, et cetera? And now all of a sudden you find yourself you don't see the end of the road anymore, because now everything is different. Now your once pristine deployment schedule is now gone to the birds, because you've introduced some scope creep into it instead of making a project change request or tabling that service and doing it afterwards. Once you start down the road, it's important to stay in the path, in the critical path, and make sure nothing can deviate and derail you. Understanding there are possibilities like that, but being flexible and staying flexible is all important also in that process. Again, you can have too many tools. Too many tools spoils the tool shed. What do you use? How do you know which one is working correctly? Have you updated them recently? I hearken back again to the network monitoring days when an organization might have 4 or 5 tools, and not necessarily keeping those tools updated. Those are things you have to look at. Are these tools that you maintain in-house, or maybe those are tools that you rent out as well, that maybe the same provider of your cloud-based services may have and just provides reporting to you down the road. You're likely to find that you want a coherent, unified platform to deal with both build and runtime aspects. So at the end of the day, everybody wants everything on one platform. Makes it easy. Makes it easy to manage. Makes it easy to access. However, it's not easy to run, and certainly it's not easy to maintain. And if you're going to need to find a way to use multiple providers in parallel. I talk about network security on a standard platform basically brick and mortar. But when you talk about cloud, we're no longer talking about networks, really not talking about network security. Now we're talking about network health. We have to make sure that we are keeping the environment healthy. And by healthy, it's just like, you know, an individual, you go to the doctor, you make sure you perform your checkups on a routine basis and maintain a very cohesive and very consistent maintenance check. Why? Because there's so many different moving parts in this. Different vendors have different means and different ways of doing things. And they may not necessarily marry to the way you as an organization. If you have a 24/7 organization, this is especially true because outage windows really cannot be tolerated, because even though the states may be asleep, Europe is just waking up. Singapore and China is in full bore in the middle of the day, pulling out, you know, otherwise accessible services and knocking them out due to a maintenance window. Good Lord, good luck now. You're going to have everybody in Asia Pacific just screaming at you because you know your maintenance window has just been chucked because you didn't go over it with your vendor. And then you have to make sure that your vendor understands that these are critical and this is critical. So I guess placement of those services and cloud-based services is important, but also placement and understanding the security requirements for each one of those is equally important. Also, regulatory requirements for each location. Just because you're a business in the United States may not necessarily mean that your policies here may, I mean policies, your governance, your criteria here may necessarily be enforced in Asia. They may have another set of rules that apply specifically and locally to them. One idea that's been batted around is the idea of redundant array of independent cloud providers. Basically, much in the way of RAID or RAID 5, the way you would do it with your disks, and providing multiple disks to store your information and keep it from become corrupt, is more or less at least healthier than what you would otherwise do in a single cloud environment. If you're a big enough organization that requires big enough services, it is highly recommended that you actually do look into when you outsource your services to different cloud providers. Reason being, you're not subjugated to one cloud provider that may or may become compromised. We look at some of the cloud services that have been out there that were compromised because they were held in a singular instance. PlayStation or Sony comes to mind. The outage for Amazon is another one that comes to mind. Certainly, services that are cloud-based, like the BES server comes to mind. Those are things that if you are not strategically placed and you're putting all your eggs in one basket, again, it's akin to putting everything on one server and on one single disk, you are really asking for trouble. Anything that has moving parts is going to break over time. That's just the nature of the beast. Even anything with static disks are subject to issues of that nature. So basically, RAID 5, everybody gets the deal. You have multiple disks and multiple IOs picking up the information, striping it, putting it out on different disks, and saving your information. That keeps you whole, because now you can recover your information. You're not necessarily freaking out if you only had one disk. Same thing holds true when you're talking about the cloud. So you have your data center cloud, you have VMware in the middle, you have your physical data center. Now you have your physical perimeter with the outside world attaching to it. So you have your user base. So you have a marketplace or a broker or some type of orchestrator in the middle brokering all of that information. Now this can be a tool set, it could be something in-house, it could be something that the cloud provider gives you or the software services provides you. But bottom line is you're able to manage the different entities out there, both from a T's and C's down to the speeds and feeds. So you're looking at different cloud providers. Cloud provider 1 goes away, cloud provider 2 and 3 are still there, and your services are intact. But more or less also, from a security aspect, cloud provider 1 gets compromised. You shut the access to cloud provider 1, you don't lose a heartbeat because cloud provider 2 and 3 are still in existence and the same services are running. You just fire up the instances and you're ready to go. It's better than not having that and then having to shut one instance down, and all of a sudden you are now left with having to clean up everything and having to tell your user base, we will be back online shortly. These services or applications will be online. And if you're a developer, that's going to mean lots of lost cycles. Maybe your product or your information is not going to get out to the to the public when you've hoped. Your release date gets pushed back, and now you've lost money because Wall Street is not happy because you've just missed your forecast because you didn't get your product out on time. So RAKE solves the problems of data portability, lock-in while simultaneously increasing reliability, flexibility, and potentially performance. Again, diversity equals health. When looking at security and network security from a virtualized standpoint, we're not looking at it, am I secure? Because nothing in effect in that environment at this point can be 100% secure. It can be healthy. If the environment is functioning, the environment is providing what it needs, you are not experiencing any major outages due to any malicious activity, then that can be considered healthy. However, if your system is slowing down, you have one instance, cloud instance, and that service is being taken to task because of breaches and security holes. Now you're going to have to respond in a knee-jerk fashion as opposed to being more of a preventive fashion. When you have more than one service provider, you can pretty much relax a little bit more versus having to go full bore and say, oh my God, everything just fell apart. Now I have to put the reins on this and try to fix it. And oh, by the way, you're going to be there for many hours. So we look at what could possibly be called cyclically. So you look at the data center and your VMware deployment, and it could be any other deployment for that matter. I just put VMware because more of it's out there. Physical data center, and then you have your physical perimeter. Your cloud provider may be EC2, but it's the only cloud provider you have. So again, you're putting all your eggs in one basket. You're really asking for security breaches because you're really limiting yourself to one pipe, basically. It doesn't matter that EC2 may necessarily be in many different locations. You're still going with the same provider who's saving this, pretty much sharing the same infrastructure. Healthy, again, we talk about what healthy means. This is healthy. Being able to maintain multiple providers using a broker of some sorts to provide you the access, the instances, the control, the security aspects, and being able to tie all of those and marry them into one cohesive fashion, and then providing that services down into your data center cloud, into the physical data center, allowing your constituents, your user base to access from the outside world. At the end of the day, that's what everybody's going for, is being able to have that type of service and being able to deliver. So to ensure that the cloud is designed to be healthy, diversify. Review your policy. Make sure it addresses vendors, hardware users. Choose tools wisely and use them. Don't just let them sit there and don't let them expire. If you feel that there's a need to review your tool set consistently, you should be doing that. Find out what works for you and find out what it doesn't. Find out what the experts are using, or find out what the cloud providers are using. Maybe it's something that you yourself can use in-house to provide another level of monitoring and control. Talk to your vendor to define security requirements. That's very important. If you don't do that, you're going to be hosed. Stick to the policy. Don't bend. Make sure that you are stringent and rigid in the way you create your policies. Specifically, how you deploy your policy to your user base. Align the needs of the business with the use of the clouds. Don't invest in things you don't need. Don't buy in excess, is basically. The same holds true. If you go to any one of the warehouse clubs out there and you have a sale on, potato chips, and you don't eat potato chips because you're on a carb-free diet, there's no real reason to buy it, but because it was on sale, you bought it anyways. These are things that apply here. Don't buy services you don't necessarily need to have. If there's a level of control that you still can maintain in-house whilst maintaining cohesiveness in your environment, then do so. Otherwise, if outsourcing makes sense, then go ahead and outsource. That brings us to the end of this webinar. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. Here are some websites that you can visit us at jsolve.com and structure-tech.com. I'm on the web. I do a lot of webinars, and I do a lot of these little videos that you can check out. Follow us on Twitter, and follow us on YouTube. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them to Diana, and Diana will give me the questions, and I will answer them as best as I can. And if I can't answer them, I will go ahead and research it for you and send you the information that you require via email. Otherwise, just come and check us out. If you have any information, we have many good reps that can go out and talk to you. And I'll be also available to talk if you'd like to come out and visit me, or I can come out and visit you. Again, have a great day. Thank you all. Join us for our next webinar. Thank you.
Great, thanks, David. I will go ahead and pass on any questions now that are sent over. David, I just got one that said, are VM firewalls suitable for edge devices?
Can you repeat the question?
It's, are VM firewalls suitable for edge devices?
They are. However, you have to make sure that that you have the appropriate level of control over those firewalls. Again, edge devices are just that, and I would have to say you have to make sure that the policy that is applied marries with that edge device or the edge device deployment, so that you're not slowing everything down. Two, make sure that if you're deploying and using any in-house or devices closer to the core or closer to the cloud, that the policies are married and that you're not doing double or triple work, because ultimately at the end of the day you will be slowing things down.
Okay, great, thank you. If anyone else has any more questions, feel free to shoot them over, and then I will send out the replay link to the webinar and the presentation later today or tomorrow. Thank you everyone for attending. Have a great day.